Hello and welcome to Sustainable Sustainability, a series of podcasts brought to you by the Stewardship Asia Centre in Singapore. I'm Teymoor Nabili, co-hosting alongside Rajeev Peshawaria, who is the CEO of the Stewardship Asia Centre. Hello again, Rajeev.
Hi there.
Our guest on the programme today is Hannah Jones, the CEO of the Earthshot Prize, visiting Singapore on one of those flying visits. Welcome, Hannah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great to see you along.
Hannah, it's absolutely delightful to have you on this show and great to meet you. The Earthshot Prize. Tell us, what is the Earthshot Prize? What does it do? How was it set up? Why?
Thank you. I'd love to. And first of all, it's great to be in Singapore because we've been spending a lot of time in Singapore. As you may know, we actually held Earthshot Week and the Earthshot Awards in Singapore in November of 2023.
Quite the event.
It was quite the event. Only Singapore could do it. But maybe to tell you a bit about the Earthshot Prize, I'll go back in time to the founding ideas behind it.
Please.
Our founder, Prince William, the Prince of Wales, really dreamt up the Earthshot Prize based on two observations and one inspiration. So the two observations in 2019 were, first of all, when visiting an amazing conservation project that was working, his observation was, why do I keep visiting solutions that are working but aren't being scaled or replicated? And his thought was, I wonder whether the real problem we have in the world is not that there's a lack of innovation around solutions in the environment, but that there is a lack of speeding to scale. The second observation, and if you take yourself back to 2019, was he really could see this rise in youth anger with the Greta Thunberg Climate Fridays. And whilst he absolutely saw the point of anger and agreed with a lot of it, and anger is important for moving systems, he also worried that it was going to translate into anxiety and potentially defeatism and apathy. And he thought that was going to be terribly dangerous and actually not be constructive. And how could we reintroduce a sense of optimism into the narrative around the environment? And so with those two observations, he asked his team to go off and find how he could use his platform of privilege and power and influence to make a difference, and where could he take inspiration. And the inspiration that we found was from President Kennedy's original moonshot challenge. If you go back in time and remember, President Kennedy challenged the American people in the 60s to land a man on the moon and bring him home safely within 10 years. He didn't realize he could land women on the moon, but that's another story. And the funny story behind it, because the Kennedy Foundation is actually a great partner of ours, is they let us go into their archives to research this. And so the real story is that President Kennedy went to Lyndon Johnson, his vice president, and said, I need to land a man on the moon. We've got to get there before anyone else. I assume we can do it. Tell me how we can do it. And Lyndon Johnson sends back a 6-page memo basically saying, no way, we can't do it. We don't have the money, we don't have the people, we don't have the science, forget it, game over. To which Kennedy then goes out and makes his moonshot speech to the American people, which if you haven't seen it, go YouTube it. It puts the goosebumps on you. And of course, as we know from history, they land a man on the moon in 7 years, not 10. Now, the really interesting inspiration for us was, how did they do that? And the answer was through this very clear shared vision that everybody got behind. 450,000 people coming together from all different parts of the world and life to collaborate to solve the problems to get the man to the moon and back. And in doing so, didn't just manage to achieve that, but created all these other innovations that led to social and environmental and economic progress. And by the way, inspired an entire generation of young boys to want to grow up and be an astronaut.
And so many great stories coming out of how NASA brought those differing collaborative teams together and all the technology that emerged from it all.
So that idea of, can you put a vision out there that people can get behind and aspire to, that feels touchable and amazing and somewhat impossible, but ultimately we can do it through human ingenuity? Can you drive and foster radical collaboration? And we should come back to that idea of radical collaboration. And in doing so, can you inspire a generation to think differently about what their future could look like? And that is how we gave birth, if you will, to the Earthshot Prize. So the Earthshot Prize, put simply, we scour the planet for innovative solutions that could help transform oceans, nature, waste, clean air, and climate change. And those solutions could come from anywhere, from anyone, and they could be for-profit, not-for-profit, government, city, state, youth movement, academic. We're very much business model agnostic because it's about the kind of impact that they could make. And then, are they proven to work? And if so, could we help them to go on that journey of fast scale?
And how long has it been going on? When was it started? And
so I laugh at this because people now go, oh, the Earthshot Prize, of course, yes. Well, everyone needs to remember we're 3 years old.
And it's testament to how well you've been doing that you've made such an impact.
Thank you. We were a twinkle in the prince's eye 3.5 years ago and very quickly mobilized with an amazing group of partners that came on board, and I call them my angel investors because really all we had was a rather bad PowerPoint deck and this twinkle in the prince's eye, and they took a bet on us and helped us to get it going.
And how did you get involved personally?
Well, that's actually quite a funny story. So previous to the Earthshot Prize, I was at Nike for 22 years as their first chief sustainability officer for 16 of those years, and then running a digital incubator called Valiant Labs. What makes it funny, this story makes it funny, is that actually I was in the middle of really thinking about how would I move into a different part of the system to try to affect systems change on climate change. When COVID happened, it was a bit of an epiphany for me. And it felt to me that COVID was my first ever black swan event. I'd never lived through a black swan event before, an event that suddenly overnight shut down the world. And it made me realize that climate change was going to make COVID look easy. And that really terrified me. And it made me think that the work I'd done at Nike, I had done what I came to do, and I wanted to go work somewhere else. But as I looked around, I saw a lot of similar roles. Then I was like, no, I've done this with Nike. Nike was the best company ever to do that with. I want to do something else. And then I saw an advert in The Economist, and it said CEO for the Earthshot Prize, and they had some rather sort of non-descriptive website that they just hacked and put together. And I thought, you know what? This is either a black tie event, which I wouldn't be very good at, or it's an incredible potential platform for system change. So believe it or not, for the first time in a very long time, I actually applied through The Economist for this job.
And you took a punt.
I took a punt. And it was a very funny conversation because there were headhunters looking for people, but they hadn't come looking for me. And I was like, I think maybe I want to do this. And so that's how we found each other.
But the position of the Earthshot Prize itself is fantastic, and thanks for telling us about that. But what we really want to do now is think about where you and the prize sit in the broader ecosystem of making the change and trying to head off that next black swan event, because you sit in a really interesting space. You're fostering innovation, you're driving solutions, you're creating moonshot thinking, and you're trying to create sustainable ongoing business, because you're not just giving people money to come up with ideas, you're taking solutions from inception to scale and sustainability, for want of a better word. So that's a really interesting position to be in, I think. Give us an example of the kind of things that you have funded. Give us a project that is really emblematic of what you're achieving and how it is going to help us stave off that black swan.
So one of the ways in which, we talked about where does the Earthshot Prize sit in the ecosystem. And I think there are many ways in which we sit in actually quite a unique position. So as a prize, we set up from the very beginning, the beating heart of the prize was to be a search engine that went out and scoured the earth for solutions. And perhaps one of the things that we hadn't quite understood was the power of being this central repository of solutions and the power of that potential data and insight to give people a glimpse into the future. So the first place where I think we can play a really important role is in actually telling the story of what is in fact an incredible movement of change that's happening. It's just not happening in the public eye, and it's fragmented and it's siloed and it's somewhat in the shadows. But when we move forward and look, when we go into, say, the next decade, our hypothesis is we will look back and realize that this was the greatest transformative movement ever of people around the world dedicating their talent and time and their ingenuity to solving the world's problems. And I think it will redefine business, and it requires a redefined leadership model. So that's one. And I think there's a huge power to that. The second is we go through a big selection process that's very rigorous and come up with 15 finalists every year, of which 5 receive catalytic grants of £1 million each. My job, however, is to take that £5 million a year and see how I can convert it by catalyzing additionality in terms of funding of all kinds to go not just into the 5 winners, but into the cohorts of 15 finalists and all our alumni. And so to do that, we have built a fellowship program which we wrap around the cohorts of finalists to give them the support they need, because it's not just, as we all know, about money. It's about leadership. It's about being able to take your idea, take it from prototype to scale at a global level. We all know how hard that is. We know what that means for the founders. We know that it needs an access to mentors and coaches and advisors and networks and a peer-to-peer community of support as well as capital. And then we've also set up a platform called Launchpad, which is in pilot phase right now, to say, how do we crowd in blended capital, mission-aligned investors, donors, venture philanthropists, impact investors, institutions, and help solve the money problem that sits at the heart of everything we're collectively doing, which is there is a massive gap between these incredible solutions and taking them to scale. And the gap is that the financial systems in which we operate don't incentivize investing in what appear to be bets that might hold too much risk, not enough return, and are facing a financial system that subsidizes the old and doesn't incentivize the new. And so when you ask me how are we helping to make this happen, we see our roles as being catalyzers of a movement and a ripple effect. Let me take an example, because you asked me for an example. Yeah.
Before you get on that, though, I mean, you're talking here about that holistic role. What role does the importance of the business model play? I mean, because we want to talk about doing good by doing well, and doing well by doing good, right? Part of which is predicated on the idea that these businesses must be sustainable in themselves. They must be able to perpetuate their own activities and perhaps even draw profit from it. How does that feed into your selection process?
Well, as I said, we are business model agnostic, and that's actually very deliberate, because my hypothesis personally is that the old siloed approaches of, oh, that's not-for-profit work over there. They don't need to make any profit. They just need to do good. And, oh, that's business over here. They need to make profit but not worry about doing any good. Those distinctions need to start to actually be thrown up in the air creatively, and we need to come out with new hybrid models. I think we're going to need to have new hybrid models for government and for city and state as well, in how we think about funding and how we think about value. So value creation, in my view, needs to be people, planet, profit. And we need to find a way to create and architect business models and hybrid models of all kinds that is de facto what is being measured and what is being valued and rewarded. So when we look at it, we have businesses that are coming in who are coming in with purpose first, because we look for their impact potential. In a startup environment, you say, what's your total addressable market? I don't say that. I say, what's your total addressable impact?
Exactly.
And then let's work backwards from there.
And that's exactly what Teymoor meant when he said doing well by doing good.
Exactly.
You're calling it a hybrid model. We believe that, profit is an important element in terms of saving the world, and profit with purpose And there's no compromise between profit and purpose. It's not either or. You have to make profit, but with purpose. So I think we're kind of getting at the same thing in slightly different ways, but we're on the same page.
Well, and I think we are getting it the same way, but herein lies the problem: is that those models are yet to be birthed and fully, entrenched into the systems, right? So we're in this wonderful place of we're all pushing the boundaries and prototyping. I mean, you've got things like the B Corps. But, nothing yet is written in the book of playbooks of all businesses that says, this is how you do a P and L and I, profit and loss and impact.
And if you could sell that idea that startups should think about what's our total addressable impact rather than that lean canvas that everyone seems to have adopted in recent years.
Right, but then use the lean canvas to get to that. As a not-for-profit, I have pulled on lean canvas, lean startup thinking, digital thinking for how we even construct the Earthshot Prize. So there's so many great methodologies for how do you take an idea, test it in market, product market fit, build it and all the rest of it. But let's have it be the enabler of this doing good and doing well.
So, it's interesting to hear you because for the last several years, we've been actually researching, and Stewardship Asia Center has been researching exactly what you're saying. There have been plenty of people throughout history, not recently, not just recently, who start with net impact first. What's the purpose of the business? It's not, yes, we want to make money, but that's not the purpose of the business. The purpose of what's the impact we want to have on society or the environment. And there's plenty of evidence on which we can create playbooks now, one of which we've just created. So actually, it's good news. We can learn from such people. And what you're doing, of course, is fantastic. You're amplifying it all to a level that, most people cannot do. So very grateful for that.
And we want to put a spotlight on that kind of best practice because behind every finalist that we celebrate, what we actually want to celebrate and push is that this becomes a movement.
Exactly
where
right.
thousands more go, that pathway, I want to be an astronaut when I grow up. That pathway, going back to the original moonshot idea, that pathway now seems clearer to me. When I started in sustainability in 1998, there was no language around what we were doing. John Elkington had only just brought out his book of People, Planet, Profit. Nobody talked about ESG. No MBA courses did any of it. Today, we're at this threshold place where I think we're not far from saying, no, look, now it's about P&L and I. This is the leadership that works. We need to shift the leadership model from being about competition versus collaboration. Kindness and vulnerability and empathy are actually the things that will make you successful. All of those things are right there. So when you have playbooks that are proven, how do we then put the spotlight not just on the individuals, but on the systems change that's possible?
And that's what we're all trying to do collectively, isn't it? I want to just come back to a word that you used twice earlier. You said it needs a different kind of leadership model. You said that a couple of times. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that different kind of leadership model? What kind of leadership works when it comes to driving the impact that you're looking for?
Well, I've done a lot of thinking about this. And my observation, at the Earthshot Prize, we have set some values for ourselves which are really serving us well. One of them is be kind. We believe in kindness. The second is collaborate, radical collaboration, never competition. So really create invitations, generosity, bring people in, support them, because what you do then is you create an ecosystem play. The third one is about creativity and really harnessing creativity, but also unleashing creativity and possibility. And the other one is around purpose, that everything we do has to ladder up to impact. And so as you think about those values, one of the things my observation is coming up through a very corporate background is that the corporate model of leadership was really built in the 50s, in the industrial era. And not many of us fit with that profile of leadership. I don't have a stay-at-home wife. I was a single mum with 2 kids. If you look at the leadership model, it was really around someone that was around the global north, a man called John. Actually, that's statistically true. Like most CEOs are white men called John. I can't remember how many Johns there are of the CEOs in America, but a lot. And not many of them look like me or talk like me or think like me. And certainly not many of them look like...
I've worked for 2 John CEOs,
There
by the
you
way,
go,
in
you
America.
Not many of them will look like a woman from the global south or an indigenous leader who may be coming with far more wisdom, but will operate in a different way. The other thing is that organizations are constructed as hierarchies. And that creates some really interesting repercussions for how people do or don't collaborate. It is a scarcity mindset that fundamentally underpins. I mean, if you go onto a PowerPoint and you want to do an org chart, the only option you have is a pyramid construct. You cannot find, I've looked everywhere, a different construct to how you would describe a team organization. Think about the folly of that, because you are de facto creating a place of scarcity and competition for who will ultimately become the CEO. The way we think about it is more like a mycelial network. It's about distribution. It's about understanding that everybody has different superpowers that can play. So play someone with the great superpower to a certain task. It doesn't matter if it's the CEO or if it's the assistant. If the assistant has the superpower, play them forward. How do you grow people around you? How do you create this ripple effect? How do you create networks of power and support that are distributed?
It's a really refreshing and radical, I guess, in a way, agenda, but certainly a different mindset as to how we approach the business of business as much as anything else. But it's also still a peripheral idea, isn't it? I mean, we talk about leadership. Most of the leadership models, most of the MBA programs still perpetuate the old model that you're talking about. And increasingly, we're hearing a number of voices funded mostly out of the US, but growing globally, of people who will look at everything you've said and said, this is the woke agenda, and it's actually damaging all our interests entirely. So what is the kind of leadership model that will take us to a place where what you're saying is not regarded as crazy?
I'm a very successful businesswoman. You can look at my track record. And I say that very purposefully because it's something that women don't say.
We need to replicate you and make it the norm.
No. What I'm saying is, if you look at people that are living this new leadership model, they are showing already that they are successful in what they're doing, and they are in mainstream business, and they are the innovators of the future. And if you look at our cohorts of finalists, the thing that has been breathtaking is the collaboration and the kindness between them. They could come in and be like, we're all competing for this prize. I'm going to make sure that you look bad. They don't do that. They actually are sharing prize money and support with each other. This is happening in the movement already. It is only the old architectures which are facing increasing challenges. And the only thing that rests, we have to disrupt ourselves if we're going to go with the times and we're going to see the transformation that we want. So I would argue this labeling of woke and anti-woke, we just need to just dust this off here, guys. This is about the old guard, the extractive industries fighting their last fight. And good on them. I get it. It's a game. You can play your game. What is emerging? What is emerging is a transformed economy that will be the engine of green growth, and it will be the engine of prosperity. And it will be led by people that rethink what leadership looks like. That's it.
Hannah, I've been studying leadership for 30 years now. Okay, that's what I do for a living. And so what you're saying in some ways is music to my ears, right? Because I'm coming to very similar conclusions. But how many people, what percentage of the people actually do you think ascribe to this form of leadership? In your experience as a corporate executive and a successful one as that, as you said, and now as a CEO of something which is one of the most important things humanity can do, what is your observation as to what percentage of humanity actually ascribes to these values and these leadership principles that you are talking about?
Again, I think all movements and change happens in the rearview mirror. And what happens is, I think it was Buckminster Fuller who said, the future is here, it's just not distributed equally. So you have to go looking in the shadows and the silos, and you have to go looking for the fragmented and the examples to realize that people like me and you are maybe at the beginning of a movement, but there are thousands like us who just haven't vocalized it. And there are even more millions of people who say, my gosh, that's the first time someone's spoken about leadership where I could see myself wanting to do that authentically. And so I would say, think about how other movements have gone slowly and in fragmented ways, and then suddenly it feels like it's exponential.
But we don't have that kind of time anymore.
Well, we need to talk about it, and we need to articulate it, and we need to create playbooks for it, and we need to influence the leadership academies, and that's why the work you're doing is so important.
For sure, but so here's the other problem. Okay, I want to be devil's advocate for just a few more minutes, right?
Love it.
You're preaching to the choir here, so but here's the other problem with what you're saying. Everything that you're describing, those values that you talked about, and the values that we have in our model, which we constructed after talking to 100 organizations that are actually doing well by doing good and succeeding, right? It is the same values that you're talking about. Those are exactly the opposite of the human condition. The default, you're asking for radical collaboration. The default human condition is I, me, myself. You're talking about huge creativity and innovation. The default human condition is that's too tedious. I don't want to do that. You're asking for a long-term view, whereas the human condition, the wiring of the brain is, I want the shortest term possible, right? You're talking about taking ownership to these problems, right? And deciding to do something. This is my issue. I want to dedicate my time. But that's not the human condition. So if the brain is wired exactly as the opposite, right? How are we going to increase the size of the movement, as you're talking about, where not millions, but we need billions to actually adopt this philosophy? How do we play against neuroscience?
Well, I love this conversation. Okay, let's go here. So I think so I've actually worked with neuroscientists on some of this, and also worked with some other people thinking about this too. I think we are in a pivotal moment in humanity. I think if you look at this new generation, we see unprecedented mental health issues. We see young women killing themselves at I can't remember what the statistic is, but it's horrifying, the latest stats on suicide rates of teenagers. We have a generation that is fundamentally in a crisis, but also in a transformation about what they care about and what they're willing to do and what they want to do with their lives. They are placing purpose at the heart, not the periphery. They are challenging authorities, and they are challenging the architectures of what they've been shown through their parents and through consumption in society. So I think we have this incredible rewiring of brain science, neuroscience happening actually already, which is often, in nature, everything starts with burning down the forest and then you see new shoots, right? So it takes 21 days to kind of reformulate a new habit, create new behaviors,
say 21,
right?
Some say 90, yeah.
So this idea that it's a static and entrenched thing, neuroscience, is, I think, let's just put that to one side. I think people can rewire themselves very well. The world in which we're living is already beginning to change to a place where we have to change how we are wired. For one thing, from a business model perspective, the mythology of the linear value chain is becoming laughable. I suddenly find a raw material that I don't really think about where it comes from. I take it through the value chain of production to selling it to a consumer, and then the value chain stops because I don't really know what happens to it afterwards. I can tell you what happens afterwards. It goes to landfill. That linear model will become circular. And circular models only work if you play them like an ecosystem collaboratively, because you can no longer control an ecosystem. You can only do it if you operate like a mycelial network or a distributed organization. And you will only thrive if the rest of the ecosystem thrives. And this idea that you can box into a nation state your concerns about climate or water is tantamount to the ridiculous. Look what's happening right now in Dubai. Look what's happening. Pick your country. So on the one hand, you have the old, and on the other hand, you have the world we are going to become, which will actually be modeled probably much more in nature, but it starts with an internal journey. It has to start with that internal journey, and it will start with a crisis of rethinking how we as humans can interact with nature.
But
how we
this
can build
question of the
prosperity.
human condition is kind of an important and interesting part of that whole mycelial network, if you like, because I think both sides are right to a certain extent. Rajeev is absolutely right in his assessment of the human condition. But the question is that condition innate, or has it been learned over the past 200 years of industrialization? And I think we can be pretty damn certain that he's absolutely right, that certainly in the past 50 years, it's just become intensely focused on me, me, me.
100%.
And the other
But
thing
before that, I mean, in the whole of human history, everything was community-based. The human condition was about community collaboration. And your assessment here that perhaps we can rewire that is kind of where I want to go with this. And maybe we could marry your Nike experience with what you're doing now. Tell me about how you've seen that transitional space occurring over the 25 years or so since Nike had its turnaround, and whether you think that change in management thinking is beginning to take root in a meaningful way, or is the condition that Rajeev is describing still prevalent?
So it's a great question, because I want to tie it into Rajeev, the conversation that we're having. When I joined Nike in 1998, it was at the height of the labor rights issues, and you really couldn't move for the company being in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. And on that journey that we collectively at Nike went on to really get into the systems change that needed to happen, the root cause analysis of what was happening, at first we had a team that was a compliance team that I was part of, who would go in and audit factories and do all that stuff. And that was the right thing to do because it was uncovering the problems. But very quickly, we realized that being the police in a system where the power sat between the factory and the buyer, us being the third-party police, from a morality perspective or a legality perspective, was only going to get us so far. And the epiphany and the aha and the rewiring, and actually we called it the Rewire Project, ironically, was when we placed the accountability into the hands of the buyers and the supply chain teams, but also the incentives. And we wired incentives for best behavior and progress into things like the orders and the volumes that would be given to a factory. So we basically said, supply chain, you are now accountable for labor rights and sustainability. We're your partners to support you. Factory, the better you get, so laddering up, the better you prove to us that you're doing amazing breakthrough sustainability and labor rights work, it will have a direct impact on your orders and the partnership with Nike, which is something of great value. That began to rewire things. Then we began to do projects that took in things like best practices in lean manufacturing and broke some of the mythologies with evidence. So one mythology was around wages. Well, we can't pay them more. We taught people that actually if you brought lean manufacturing in and you empowered the women in the manufacturing space, the women that were doing the sewing, to be the ones that were showing where there was a quality issue or what was happening, and you paid them more, your productivity and your profitability went up, not down. We proved it. So what you have to do is actually go in, and depending on your person you're talking to, you actually have to prove to them that the mental model they had was a falsity. And when they see that with evidence, the ability then to make people's synapses move differently and see different things that used to be counterintuitive. You never used to get the time of day. Nobody cared about waste. Why would anyone care about waste? Once we went in and mapped that the waste from just in footwear, from cutting the materials for the shoes, the waste that fell on the factory floor in a year at the time was worth $1 billion. The CFO at the time was like, I love waste. Let's go after waste. You rewire people's brains by using what they know and taking what was counterintuitive to make it the new normal. And then suddenly you go gangbusters.
And so what you're saying, if I may summarize a little bit, is there was a time when cigarettes were good.
Yeah.
there was a time when, a soda can was supposed to take care of your headache. And it took a period of time, and people started their day with their breakfast with a Coca-Cola or a Pepsi, right? To today, where both sodas and cigarettes are at a different place than they were remember Madison Avenue of the 70s?
Yeah.
And the cigarette ads?
The Mad Men.
And
the Mad
just
Men.
today, cigarettes are being banned from sale in the UK for anyone under a certain age.
Fantastic. So what you're saying is that this is the beginning of that kind of a
Yes.
movement, and people, like the kinds of people we've been interacting with this week here at Ecosperity in Singapore from around the world, are the kind of people that will actually take this forward, and eventually the tipping point will come. That's the
100%.
point.
I mean, and we do this as a humanity. We do this all the time. We all take for granted Airbnb. We all take for granted Ubers and Grabs. We take for granted that we have an iPhone in our pocket.
You remember?
Hello.
Yeah.
I didn't used to have an iPhone in my pocket. I used to have vinyls. Oh, now I still have vinyls. But my point is, the job of the innovators, the people at the front pushing the boundaries, is to make something the new normal, to make it boring, make it the everyday.
Yes.
That's our job.
So coming back to innovation then, which is what the Earthshot Prize is all about, right? What have you noted in working with all these amazing people over the years on innovation? What works and what doesn't work? And what enables innovation to flourish? And because, the norm about innovation is 8 out of 10 times you fail. But you don't give up, because the 2 times that you do succeed, you change the world. So when it works, why does it work? When it doesn't work, why does it not work?
Well, that's a great question. The first thing that comes to mind, you cannot have fear. So in the neuroscience, going back to neuroscience, fear and creativity don't coexist in the brain. If there is fear, it's very hard to be creative.
Okay.
So how do we create an environment where fast failure is rewarded as learnings, rather than seeing it as a personal slur and you have just lost your mind, etc.? Because to be an innovator, you have to be able to take risks, you have to be creative, and you have to come with the idea that 9 people out of 10 are going to say, that's crazy. What do you mean you want to turn seaweed into food for cows to reduce methane by 80%? You've lost your mind. Go off and go to a nice consultancy and get a good job and get a nice mortgage. So we have to create environments where innovators have the right environment and incentives to take risks on behalf of all of us that could lead to solutions. The second is curiosity. You have to create an environment where people are constantly curious and able to be learners, because what you need is the questions, not the answers. Most leadership of the 20th century positioned that the leader always had the answers. Leadership in the 21st century means you have to be good at asking the questions and going out and hunting the answers in strange places. I think those few things right there are really important. The third is, as someone that needs to bet on innovation, run a portfolio. Run a portfolio and don't just bet on one thing, bet on multiples, and then create cross-pollination between them so they can learn from each other, because you want to set them up with almost an unfair advantage, which is access to the best mentors, the best coaches, the best networks to help people push their ideas forward. And then invest in the leadership of the founders, because it's a hard and lonely journey to go from idea to scale. It's a roller coaster. They're going to walk through the valley of death. Mm-hmm. Everyone's going to think they're crazy. They're going to get to a place where they run out of capital in 3 weeks and they don't know how they're going to tell their team they're going to have to fire them. They're going to hit some huge roadblock. You got to be there for them. You've got to give them love, and you've got to give them kindness, and you've got to give them the support, and then you've got to go out and fight for them.
How do you create that kind of environment where fear is reduced at the organizational level, and individually, how do you overcome fear?
Well, there's the beautiful Nelson Mandela quote that I've held close to my heart for a long time, which is, courage is not the absence of fear. It is knowing fear and doing it anyway. So I think you have to acknowledge that you always have fear, right? The question is, do you have what it takes? Do you have the courage and the support around you to say, that's really scary, but I'm going to do it anyway, and I know that I've still got someone in my corner? I think in an organization, you have to work at it every day. I think that, to your point about wiring, society and old models of leadership is wired around fear, and power is dangerous. Power is very dangerous because when fear surrounds power, the silence sets in. And when the silence sets in, the truth leaves the room.
That is an enormously powerful conversation that we could spend hours pursuing, but we're going to have to start wrapping it up. But this thing about fear is interesting, and it brings us back a little way to where we began with Kennedy. I mean, my son, who's 13, and he's always saying it's too hard. And, I keep thinking, and I've said this to him before, and he doesn't get it, obviously. Kennedy also said, we do these things not because they're easy, but because they're hard.
Yes.
And that sense of having the confidence to attack it because it's hard is something that's really hard to instill in people, isn't it? But the other thing that we also kind of need to come back to, because we let it go a while ago, is, you were going to give us an example of the kind of things that you're funding and encouraging, an emblematic project that the Earthshot Prize has gotten behind.
So I have so many, but let me pick a few of them from this region. There's a wonderful one of our winners called Vidyat, who runs an organization called Takacha. And they're based out of Delhi, and he observed a problem, which is air pollution. As we all know, Delhi has a huge air pollution issue. And he realized that some of that air pollution was coming from subsistence farmers burning their stubble at harvest time, which is a traditional practice all around the world. And if he could prevent them from doing that, he could actually prevent not just air pollution, but also carbon being emitted. So he came up with, hacked together with his co-founder from Canada, they hacked together a piece of machinery that looks a bit like a coffee torrefication machinery, where you put the beans in and it turns out as coffee. And so this little machine, which is very low cost, you put the stubble in and what comes out is high, rich fertilizer. So you then, with that fertilizer, are also increasing the productivity yields for the farmers, which is raising the subsistence farmers' income level. So virtuous cycle, lower air pollution, lower carbon, higher income for subsistence farmers, working out the model to make that affordable for them. And he is now talking to multiple companies. He became a breakthrough fellow in part because of our partnership with the Bill Gates' team. And they're being pulled into supply chains by major companies because, of course, he addresses their scope 3 demands for reporting and for impact mitigation. So it's a win-win. Bring that to subsistence farmers around the world that burn their stubble, and you've got a great scalable solution that will have a triple bottom line impact.
You need to take that to Indonesia.
Yes.
100%.
Yes, for our sake in the whole region.
Yeah.
Very good, very good.
Fantastic. And I guess, would that be, I don't know, do you have anything else?
Oh, I've got hundreds more if you want. I can give you one more maybe, or two, whatever you like.
Just give us one more example, and then we'll follow up with the final question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, the other example is, I come out of the apparel industry and the textile industry, so I'm very conscious of the impact of clothing and apparel on landfill, but also the use of agriculture in service of things like cotton, etc. Polyester in apparel is all based on fossil fuels and very hard actually to recycle. So the question of how you turn the impact of garments into something more positive is a really thorny one. And with me here this week in Singapore is the company Circ, who is one CIRC. They're one of the companies that have come through our finalists this year. And what they have figured out how to do uniquely is to take garments which are made of a blend, which are usually the hardest to recycle, a blend of polyester and cotton, which is most garments. They figured out how to actually disaggregate the cotton from the polyester and then turn it into renewable garments and threads. And they're working now with Zara, and they're working with Inditex and others, and H&M. They're actually looking at how they can bring their first ever plant, because of the connection here with Singapore and Earthshot, to Indonesia. So you mentioned Indonesia. Instead of having all these textile factories in Indonesia, how do you actually start to build the future of the textile industry, which is the recycling industry, to turn all of those old textiles into new textiles and avoid the landfill? There's one to get behind.
Fantastic, fantastic. Would love to learn more about all of those. I want to pose a question to you that you posed to us the other night at dinner with the president, where you asked us to close our eyes and imagine. So a similar question. It's 2035. The Earthshot Prize has been hugely instrumental in creating that radical collaboration and that amazing innovation that you're talking about. It's 2035. What is your wish for the world for the next 20 years?
It's a great question now to have turned that on me. By 2035, my wish is that every young person wants to grow up to run a business that will be a future Earthshot winner. My wish is that to Earthshot is a verb in the dictionary. My wish is that by 2030, the world will actually have reduced emissions by over 40%, and that we will have protected 30% of the oceans, freshwater, and nature. And that in doing so, we have brought to the world a new model of leadership where it is mainstream and the new normal, where to marry purpose with your day-to-day is the only thing that we do. And finally, randomly, but beautifully, that the chatter and the noise of nature makes music for all of us.
Beautiful. Amen to that. And with that, Hannah, it's been an absolute pleasure for Teymoor and me to have you with us on the show.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much, and all the best to
Thank
you
Good luck.
personally and to the Earthshot Prize for saving humanity. Thank
Well,
you.
you're in it with me.